Before this story begins, let everything around you settle. Let your body find its weight in whatever holds you. Let the sounds of the world soften into the background where they can stay without requiring anything from you. There is only this: a story that begins with a number large enough to lose its meaning, and a question the universe spent decades failing to ask. The number is 3,986,124,912,000. That is the figure recorded in the Shi'ar Imperial Census of the post-Infinity period, a document first cited in Jason Aaron's 2013 Thanos Rising series, and later cross-indexed in the files of the Proscribed, the cosmic coalition that assembled in the aftermath of what most sentient civilizations, when they need to refer to it at all, have come to call the snap. 3,986,824,912,000 sentient lives, removed from existence in the span of a single heartbeat, not killed, not conquered, not reduced to ash in the ordinary sense, which at least implies a remnant, something that was once there and can be pointed to as evidence of what was lost, something closer to erasure. The universe simply stopped believing in them, and the hand responsible belonged to Thanos of Titan, a being who had spent centuries building a philosophy to justify what his mother's face had told him in the first moment of his life. You know this story. You know the name, the golden gauntlet set with 6 stones, the outcome. You know the empty chairs and the half-drunk cups of coffee, and the people left standing in the particular quiet of a world that has lost half of everything it knew how to be. You know what Thanos did. This script is not about what Thanos did. It is about what Thanos held. Because the 6 Infinity Stones, soul, time, space, mind, reality and power, are not weapons. They have been used as weapons, which is a different thing entirely. They are the 6 generative forces through which the universe produces itself, moment by moment, in the ongoing act of creation that most beings experience simply as the background condition of existing. They are the architecture of making. Thanos pointed them at the universe and used them to subtract. He did not have to. There is another version of this story, a version in which the hand that holds the gauntlet pauses, in the half-second before it closes, and something surfaces. Some old piece of data, some memory of a world built around the principle that beauty was a technology of mind, some trace of a child who loved his mother and spent decades trying to understand what she had seen when she looked at him. In that version, the fist opens instead of closes. In that version, everything that follows is different, not simpler, not safer. Different in the specific and consequential way that happens when the most dangerous being in the cosmos discovers, at the last possible moment, that he has been holding the most powerful instrument ever assembled and pointing it in the wrong direction. How the mad titan who spent centuries devoted to annihilation became, in the telling of this alternate history, something the universe had no protocol for. A god who chose to make things, starts where all things about Thanos start, on a moon of Saturn, in a city full of carefully calibrated light. The moon was called Titan, and in the years before its collapse it was considered one of the most internally coherent civilizations in the solar system. That phrase, internally coherent, is doing specific work here. It does not mean powerful, or wealthy, or impressive by the standards civilizations usually use to measure themselves against each other. The Titan Eternals, as Jim Starlin documented across his long engagement with their history beginning with his 1973 run on Captain Marvel, were not expansionist. They were not militaristic. They were not oriented toward the kind of outward aggression that tends to produce the histories that other civilizations notice and record. By the standards of the cosmos, they were a quiet people. What they were was precise. The precision expressed itself above all else in how they built things. Titan's civic philosophy, developed across centuries of habitation on the moon's rocky surface, held the built environment responsible for the inner lives of the people who inhabited it, not metaphorically responsible, not in the soft sense of a good leader caring about their citizens' welfare, but actually and measurably responsible in the way that a structural engineer is responsible for whether a building stands. The architecture was engineered with the same rigor that other civilizations brought to weapons design or agricultural productivity, but the goal was one most civilizations never thought to set as a goal. The production, in the minds of ordinary Titan residents going about their ordinary days, of a specific quality of mental state: clarity, ease, the sensation, repeatable and consistent, of a thought thinking itself all the way through to its conclusion. The terraced cities cut into the moon's rocky face caught the sun's reflected light through arrays of focusing crystals, developed over generations of optical refinement, and channeled that light into streets and plazas at angles documented in the Titan architectural records as producing what the colonists called a clarifying effect. The buildings held proportions developed by mathematicians working in a tradition that refused to separate their discipline from aesthetics, structure calibrated at a level below conscious perception to place the individual body in a relationship with surrounding space that produced, reliably, something close to ease. Fountains ran in the public plazas. Libraries were built to interior dimensions calibrated by people who believed that the volume of a room shaped the quality of thinking done within it. The air in the late afternoon hours carried a faint blue-gold quality that the colonists documented with the careful, slightly self-conscious specificity of scientists trying to describe something they could measure but could not fully explain. It was, by most available accounts, a beautiful world. Not the kind of beauty that announces itself and expects acknowledgement. The kind that reveals itself slowly. You inhabit it, and something in your posture changes without your instruction. Something in your breathing adjusts, and only later, when you are somewhere else entirely, do you realize that the difference you felt was not accidental, was not the mood you brought with you, but the product of someone thinking very carefully about what a space should do to the people who live inside it. Into this world, during a late afternoon when the crystal arrays were filling the central plaza with their particular quality of gold, a child was born who should not, by the standards of the colony, have been possible. Among the Eternals of Titan, deviant mutation, the eruption of the stranger, older celestial engineering that underlies the eternal genome, had not occurred in the colony's living memory. When it appeared in the child that Suisan delivered at the end of a long and difficult birth, as documented in Aaron's Thanos Rising the One, the medical staff did not immediately know what they were looking at. Suisan knew. She looked at her child, the size of him, unusual even by eternal standards, the deep purple-grey of his skin which had no precedent in the colony's genetic record, the quality of his eyes, which the medical notes describe with the careful neutrality of professional language as presenting an unusual degree of apparent focus for a newborn. And she reached for something sharp. She was stopped. The child survived. The moment passed with the specific quality of emergencies, which is to say, quickly and then very quietly, with everyone in the room understanding that something had happened the room would need to reorganize itself around. Aaron's Thanos Rising renders this scene without dramatic amplification. Suisan does not explain herself with the eloquence that villain origin stories often grant to the parents of their subjects. She acts on instinct, the instinct of a mind that has registered something in the data of her child's face and arrived at a conclusion before she can examine it. She is the first person who ever looks at Thanos and sees an ending. The child who survived that first day was not born broken. This is the detail the adult mythology of Thanos has almost entirely absorbed. The Thanos of the Gauntlet, of the Snap, of 6 decades of Marvel storytelling, of the MCU's most consequential antagonist arc, is so completely defined by the ideology of annihilation he arrives at in his adult life, that the child he was before that ideology calcified tends to disappear from view. But Aaron's series documents him with care, and what it documents is this. In the years between his birth and his first turn toward the philosophy that would eventually produce the Gauntlet, Thanos was an unusually sensitive child. Not sensitive in the contemporary colloquial sense of a person easily overwhelmed by emotional input. Sensitive in the older, more technical sense, acutely responsive to data. He felt the currents in a room the way a precision instrument feels temperature change, completely, accurately, with no buffer between the data and the response. He felt his mother's fear of him the way a tuning fork feels a struck note, not as an external event to be processed at a distance, but as a vibration that went through the full length of his structure and did not stop. He loved her. The histories of the adult Thanos absorb this and drown it, but it sits quietly in the early pages of Aaron's series, and it is worth dwelling there. Thanos loved Suisan with the particular intensity of a child who knows, at a level below articulation, that the love is complicated and asymmetrical and not fully returned, and who loves harder because of that rather than less. He watched her. He studied her expressions with the same methodical attention he brought to every system that interested him. He was trying to understand what she had seen in the first moment of his life, and whether what she had seen was something about the world or something about him. The question followed him into adolescence and beyond. He grew up in the beautiful city, and the late afternoon light fell on him the same way it fell on everyone else. He could feel what the architects had intended, that quality of clarity, that sense of a thought completing itself. He was, by the account of his early teachers across Aaron's Arc, a remarkable student. Not a prodigy in the sense of a gift expressing itself easily, but a very serious mind that had decided understanding something was the only acceptable outcome and would not rest before arriving there. He was interested in biology, in the structure of living systems, in the question of what the living side of the boundary between the living and the non-living actually consists of when you examine it carefully enough. In a different life, those interests might have made him a physician, a researcher, someone whose name appears in the histories as a contributor to the understanding of aging, of cellular organization, of the architecture of consciousness. He had everything such a person requires: the precision, the patience, the appetite for understanding, the willingness to work through the dark towards something not yet visible. The cave incident in Thanos Rising, the moment that most careful readers of that series identify as the actual hinge point, the moment where the sensitive child becomes something else, something that has not yet found its name but is moving in the direction of one, occurs in the middle of Aaron's Arc and is rendered with the same quietness that characterizes the series at its best. A group of adolescent Titan Eternals exploring the moon's underground formations, a natural labyrinth of passages that the Eternal Young used as a proving ground, a place where the controlled beauty of the city above gave way to something less deliberate, more genuinely indifferent. Something in the dark found them first. It killed 3 of the group before anyone understood what was happening. By the time it was over, Thanos was the only survivor. He had survived not by being stronger or faster, or better prepared, but because he was the one among them who did not panic. He did not panic because he was not afraid, and he was not afraid because in the moment when the creature oriented toward him, and the situation resolved itself into variables and outcomes, something that had been running quietly in the background of his ordinary life moved to the foreground and made itself known. He found the stillness in the dark interesting. He came out of that cave and sat in the late afternoon light of Titan, and held what he had found the way you hold something you're not sure is safe to put down. Around him, the crystal arrays did their work. The fountains ran. The proportions of the buildings held their quiet calibration. He sat in the middle of all of it, and felt the clarifying effect the architects had intended, and he used it to think about what he was. The conclusion he arrived at was not, initially, an ideology. It was something smaller and more foundational. He was a being for whom the cessation of living things did not produce the response it produced in most living things. He filed this observation carefully. He turned it over. He examined it from every angle his considerable intelligence could find. And the conclusion he arrived at was not that he was broken. The conclusion was that he was seeing clearly. The universe contained more life than it could sustain, and this imbalance would, if unaddressed, produce its own catastrophic correction. He was one of the few minds precise enough to hold this fact without the distortion of feeling. He thought he was being clear-eyed. He was being accurate, which is not the same thing. Accuracy without wisdom produces a particular kind of error. Not the error of ignorance, which simply lacks the data, but the error of precision, which has organized all the data immaculately around a center point that happens to be wrong. The whole structure radiates from that center with perfect internal consistency, and because the consistency is genuine, because the logic actually follows, the structure resists correction with a force proportional to its own coherence. Thanos was building such a structure. He was 14 years old, sitting in the clarifying light of a civilization built around the principle that beauty was a technology of mind, and he was constructing a perfect argument for the wrong answer. He was asking the right question. What does the universe need from a being who can see it clearly? And arriving at the wrong answer, less. Stay here for a moment, in the late afternoon of Titan. The crystal arrays are doing their work. The light has that blue-gold quality the architects designed and tested and refined across generations of careful iteration. The fountains run. somewhere in the city, a child sits at the edge of the plaza, and he is doing what he always does, watching, collecting, feeling the currents in the room with more accuracy than any instrument the Titan Eternals have built to measure such things. He's feeling the way the light moves across the stone. He's a child who could have built things like this. Cities designed to make their people more thoughtful simply by existing in them. He had everything it required: the sensitivity, the precision, the patience, the capacity to hold a question open without forcing it toward a premature answer. The cave redirected those gifts, it did not remove them. They remained in him across everything that followed, across the centuries, across the campaigns, across the gauntlet itself, present and dormant, capable of being recalled. In one version of this story they were recalled. In one version of this story they came back exactly when they were needed, at the moment of the greatest power and the last possible chance for a different answer. The distinction between curiosity and cruelty is one that Aaron's Thanos Rising tracks with care across its early chapters, and what it tracks is the gradual narrowing of a category. The child Thanos who disassembled mechanisms was interested in how things worked. The adolescent Thanos who began studying larger and more complex organisms was interested in the same thing, but the thing he was interested in had shifted. It was no longer how mechanisms worked, but how life worked, and specifically how life stopped working, and what the moment of cessation could reveal about the nature of what had been alive. This narrowing was not in itself the turn toward philosophy. The turn came with the discovery, which Aaron's series documents with a specific precision, that the moment of cessation revealed nothing he had not already known, and that knowing this made him unusual in a way he had no category for. He spoke to his teachers about this, not directly, not with the kind of directness that would have required a response the Titan Eternal educational system was not equipped to give. Indirectly, through the questions he asked in the context of legitimate scientific inquiry, questions about the distinction between biological systems and purely chemical ones, about what made the difference between a living system and a non-living one measurable rather than merely felt. His teachers answered in the frameworks available to them, which were good frameworks, developed by people who believed that understanding the world was one of the highest activities available to a conscious mind. They gave him the best answers they had. He filed those answers and understood that they were not, for what he was actually asking, sufficient. His father, Alaz, who understood more about genetics and the mechanisms of deviant expression than anyone else on Titan, watched his son with the particular quality of attention that a very intelligent parent gives to a child who has exceeded the parent's ability to guide them. Alaz was not a cold man. He was precise, as most Titan Eternals were, but the precision in him was organized around a genuine warmth for the civilization he had built his life in, a genuine appreciation for the things the Titan experiment in collective living had produced. He sat with Thanos in the evenings, in the Titan tradition of evening conversation that the colonists had developed as a civic practice, the tradition of meeting at the end of the day in public spaces to talk, not about business or logistics, but about ideas, the way civilizations with that particular quality of abundance and safety sometimes do. He sat with his son and he could feel the specific quality of the mind beside him, and he was honest enough with himself to acknowledge that what he felt was not entirely comfortable, not dangerous, not wrong, extraordinary and uncontained, in the way that a very large body of water is extraordinary and uncontained. He did not know what to do with it. He loved his son. He did not know what to do with him. These two things coexisted in Alaz for the years of Thanos' adolescence, sitting together in the evening conversations, producing between them the particular quality of a relationship between a parent and a child, where the love is genuine and the understanding is insufficient, and where both parties are aware of the gap and neither has the language for it. Thanos would leave Titan and spend the centuries between his childhood and the moment of the gauntlet constructing with characteristic thoroughness, a philosophy that justified what his mother's face had told him. He would find in the personification of death that the Marvel universe makes literal and gives a name, the external mirror that reflected back what he had decided he was. He would court her and wage campaigns on her behalf and do things in her name that the records of the proscribed document, with the careful, measured language of beings trying to process events at the outermost edge of their conceptual categories. And then someone assembled the gauntlet, and it came to his hand. 6 stones. The 6 generative forces of the cosmos, gathered for the first and only time into a single portable locus of control. He looked at them, he felt their weight, and everyone in the universe who knew what those stones were held their breath, waiting for the hand to close. The universe, in its long habit of fearing what Thanos would take away, had never once stopped to consider what he might have given. Understanding why that question matters starts with understanding what the stones themselves actually are, and what they were built at the birth of this cosmos to do. Let the room settle around you. Let the weight of your body become something you can simply notice without adjusting. This next part of the story requires a kind of attention that is softer than the kind used for facts. Not the attention of someone trying to remember something, but the attention of someone letting something be true. Breathe in gently, and then let this rest in you. The 6 Infinity Stones did not begin as stones. They did not begin as objects at all, in any sense that the word object usually carries. They coalesced. That is the word that appears most consistently across the cosmological records in the Ultimates 2 series written by Al Ewing beginning in 2016, in the cosmic histories compiled by the Watchers, in the fragmented records of the prescribed that predate the current iteration of the universe by several cosmic epochs. At the moment when what those same records call the 6th cosmos was learning what it wanted to be. The 6th cosmos is a concept that requires its own slow moment of attention. The Marvel universe, in its cosmological traditions, does not describe this iteration of reality as the first or the only. Before this cosmos there were others, the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, each a complete universe with its own physical laws and its own civilizations and its own internal logic, each ending not in simple destruction, but in something the records describe as transformation, the energy and information of one cosmos, folding into the seed of the next. The 6th cosmos is the one that contains the Marvel universe as you know it. It is the one that contains Titan, and Earth, and Asgard, and the Kree, and the Skrull, and the Shi'ar, and the Celestials, and the Living Tribunal, and everything else the Marvel cosmological tradition has ever documented. And at the moment when it was forming, at the moment before matter had settled into stars, before the long, slow architecture of galaxies had begun, before anything that could be called a civilization was possible anywhere in the dark, 6 things coalesced out of the raw energy of that forming universe. They were the 6 aspects of creation itself, each one the concentrated, crystallized, portable expression of one of the forces through which a universe builds itself into being, soul. The animating force, the quality that distinguishes the living from the non-living, the spark that differentiates a biological system from a chemical one. Time, the force of sequence, of cause and effect, of the direction in which events unfold, the mechanism that makes before and after different from each other. Space, the force of placement, of location, of the quality that means 2 things can be in different places rather than the same place, the architecture of distance itself. Mind, the force of cognition, of awareness, of the capacity for a system to model itself and its environment and act on those models. Reality, the force of manifestation, of the relationship between the possible and the actual, the mechanism by which the universe selects from among its infinite potential states, the one that exists right now. Power, the sustaining force, the energy that holds all the others in motion, the quality that means the universe continues to be rather than ceasing. Together, the 6 stones are not simply powerful. Together, the 6 stones are the operating system of the universe itself, the substrate on which everything that exists runs, from the Celestials in their contemplations at the edge of time to the smallest living cell dividing in the warm dark of an unremarkable ocean on an unremarkable world. To hold all 6 simultaneously is not simply to be powerful. To hold all 6 simultaneously is to be, in the most literal sense available, the universe's own hand, the instrument through which the universe can reach into itself and change what it is. Thanos understood a version of this. His understanding was not imprecise, it was simply incomplete in the specific way that all of his understandings were incomplete, the way that a very fine instrument calibrated to measure one thing gives you extraordinarily accurate data about that thing and nothing at all about the other things. He understood the stones as instruments of will. He understood that to hold them was to be able to impose any condition on reality, to will any state of affairs into or out of existence. What he understood less clearly, or perhaps understood and set aside in the service of the argument he had been building since the cave, was the direction the stones were oriented in by their own nature. The stones are generative. They coalesced at the moment of creation, not destruction. Their natural orientation, the direction they point when held by a will that is not actively overriding them, is toward making things. This is documented, albeit in fragmented form, in the records the Silver Surfer delivered to Reed Richards after the resolution of the Infinity Gauntlet event, records now housed in the Baxter Building and referenced in the 1998 What If series published by Marvel under the heading What If the Infinity Gauntlet had not been destroyed. The Surfer's report notes something that most of the post-event analysis overlooked in its focus on preventing a recurrence. The stones did not resist Thanos. They complied. But the compliance required a sustained effort of will on his part, an active, ongoing override of the stone's generative orientation in a way that suggested the stones would have done something different had the will directing them been different. They were inclined toward creation. Thanos overcame that inclination by an act of pure will. The snap was not the stone's natural expression. The snap was Thanos forcing the instruments of creation to perform a subtraction, the way you could, theoretically, use a very fine musical instrument as a blunt object. The instrument would comply, but it would not be doing what it was made to do. What the stones were made to do when held by a will aligned with their own orientation is this: make things, restore things, bring into existence what does not exist, or what has ceased to exist, or what could exist if the circumstances were altered. Build, in the widest possible sense of that word. Not just objects or places, but relationships, conditions, qualities, states of being that have no physical instantiation, but that are as real as anything material. Peace, memory, the specific quality of a late afternoon when the light has been channeled through crystal arrays and carries with it a faint blue-gold clarifying effect. All of these fall within the domain of the 6 stones, correctly oriented. The creative use of the gauntlet would not be simpler than the destructive use. This is an important distinction, and it is worth sitting with. A common intuition, confronted with the idea of using infinite power for creation rather than destruction, is that creation is the gentler option, the safer option, the less catastrophic option, the one that the heroes would obviously prefer and that the cosmic entities would obviously sanction. This intuition is wrong. Creation at the scale the gauntlet permits is not gentler than destruction at that scale. It is, if anything, more consequential. To destroy half of all sentient life removes things from reality. To create at the scale of the Infinity Gauntlet is to assert one will's vision of what reality should contain. It is to say, this is what should exist, and my will is the basis for that claim. Destruction is a subtraction. Creation at this scale is a statement of authority. The difference is not in the degree of impact on the universe. The difference is in the direction of the claim being made. The stones, in short, are not safer in creative hands than in destructive ones. They are different. What they enable is not a lesser catastrophe but a different kind of event. An event whose consequences unfold not through loss but through addition, and whose deepest challenge is not how to prevent the damage, but how to determine who has the right to decide what gets added. These are questions the universe had never had to answer before. Not in this form. Not with a being of Thanos' will and precision, and 5 centuries of accumulated certainty behind the stones. There is a useful distinction to be made between what might be called primary creation and mediated creation. Primary creation is what the universe does continuously without external direction. The formation of stars from clouds of gas and dust under the pressure of gravity. The development of life from chemical processes under the pressure of planetary conditions. The emergence of consciousness from biological complexity under the pressure of evolutionary selection. These are acts of creation in the fullest sense. They produce genuinely new things that did not exist before, but they operate through the universe's own internal processes rather than through the assertion of an external will. The universe's own selecting mechanism produces them, the reality that results from the vast interaction of all available forces, no single one of which has authority over the others. Mediated creation, creation through the gauntlet, is different in a specific and important way. It produces new things not through the universe's own internal processes, but through the assertion of one will over the universe's selecting mechanism. The will says, this should exist. The stones make it exist. The universe's own selecting mechanism, which would have produced some other outcome from its vast internal interaction, is replaced by the single selection made by the single will. This is faster than primary creation. It is also more authoritative, in the sense that a dictated decision is more authoritative than a negotiated one, and it carries, embedded in everything it produces, the invisible signature of the will that produced it, not as a physical mark, not as anything detectable by most instruments, but as a cosmological fact. This thing exists because one being decided it should, and it would not exist otherwise. This is what the stones are, when held by a will that is using them. They are not amplifiers of the universe's own creative capacity. They are the replacement of that capacity by a singular authority. The universe does not become more creative when the gauntlet is in use. The universe stops creating altogether, in the sense that its own selecting mechanism is suspended, and one will does the selecting instead. This is the understanding that the living tribunal had encoded in its post-gauntlet jurisprudence. This is the understanding that Thanos would arrive at, in a garden, in the honest air of Titan's early morning, several months into the alternate history that begins with the hand opening instead of closing. The direction of the will, creation rather than destruction, changes the character of the outcome. It does not change the nature of the act. No one had thought to develop a protocol for that scenario. Not the living tribunal, not the Watchers, not Adam Warlock, who had spent more time thinking about the gauntlet than perhaps any other being, and who had been designated, briefly and then revoked, as its proper custodian. They had all prepared for the version of Thanos they knew, the one who subtracted, the one who erased, the one who used the wrong verb. None of them had thought to prepare for the version who, in the half-second before the fist closed, heard a different word. That word was give. How it surfaced, what disrupted the pattern of centuries long enough to let it through, requires going back to the canonical story of the Infinity Gauntlet, to the specific emotional wound at the centre of what Thanos was actually doing when he assembled the 6 stones and used them the way the histories record. Because the snap was not, in the final analysis, an act of philosophy. The philosophy was the justification. The snap was an act of grief. And grief, even in a being of extraordinary will and 5 centuries of cultivated certainty, is a place where surprises are possible. Jim Starlin assembled the Infinity Gauntlet story across 6 issues published between 1991 and 1992, and what he built was not primarily a story about the power of the stones. It was a story about a being who could not, despite holding the most powerful object ever assembled, get the one thing he actually wanted. The philosophy of universal balance was real to Thanos. It was not a pretense, not an invented justification he did not believe. But underneath the philosophy, documented with careful consistency across Starlin's decades of work with this character, was something simpler and older and sadder. He had been trying, since the moment his mother looked at him and reached for something sharp, to prove that the ending he represented was not a tragedy but a gift. He needed Lady Death to confirm that. She did not. Understanding what happened in that moment, and what happened differently in the version of this story that chose a different path, requires stepping into the canonical story at the exact moment it almost broke. Let your breathing settle into something slower than it was. Let the story hold you, rather than pulling you forward. There is a single moment at the centre of this alternate history, a moment so small in duration and so large in consequence that it requires more care than most moments get. Let yourself arrive at it gently. Jim Starlin's Infinity Gauntlet, published across 6 issues beginning in July 1991, is one of the most widely read and most widely misremembered stories in Marvel's cosmic canon. It is remembered, primarily, as the story in which Thanos assembled the gauntlet and killed half of all life. This is accurate. It is also remembered as the story in which the heroes fought back and, against overwhelming odds, prevailed. This is less accurate than it appears. The heroes did not prevail through force. They could not. No combination of force available to any being in the Marvel Universe was sufficient to overcome the gauntlet, and the heroes who fought in those issues, Thor, Captain America, the Silver Surfer, Adam Warlock's assembled coalition, were not formidable opponents by the standards the Gauntlet set. They were, as Thanos himself observed during the battle, gestures. The story resolved not because of heroism, but because of Thanos' own consistent flaw. He always, at the moment of absolute victory, found a way to step back from it. The reason for this flaw is the reason for the snap itself, and it is documented most clearly in the 4th issue of Stalin's series. By that point in the story, the snap has happened. Half of all life is gone. The universe has been restructured to reflect Thanos' philosophical convictions about balance and resource management. He has done everything his philosophy required of him. He has demonstrated on the largest possible canvas that the ending he represents is not cruelty but service, and Lady Death, the cosmic personification of mortality, who is, in the Stalin conception, the being Thanos has loved and served for centuries, has turned away from him. She does not speak. Death, in Stalin's rendering, rarely speaks. She communicates through orientation, through where she directs her attention, through what she faces and what she turns away from. And in the 4th issue, she turns away from Thanos. She has received what he offered. She has acknowledged through the gesture of the snap itself that she knows what he is and what he is capable of. She simply does not respond the way he needed her to respond. He is, in her estimation, still not her equal, still something less than what she requires. The genocide of half the universe's sentient life was, from her perspective, a grand gesture, and grand gestures in relationships of any kind are a substitute for the thing the relationship is actually built on or broken by. Thanos experiences this rejection with a clarity that most beings experiencing rejection do not have. He is too precise a mind to mistake what is happening or to pretend it is something else. He knows that she has received what he offered. He knows that it was not enough, and this knowledge, arriving at the moment of his greatest demonstration of power, at the moment when the gauntlet is on his hand and there is no force in the cosmos that can oppose him, produces something unexpected in a being defined by certainty. It produces doubt. Not philosophical doubt, not doubt about the correctness of the balance argument, not second thoughts about the methodology. Something more personal, something closer to the question a child asks when love is given and not returned. He had been showing her what he was, she had seen it, and she had turned away. In the canonical timeline, Thanos responds to this moment by turning outward, by assembling greater demonstrations, by escalating the very dynamic that the rejection has exposed as insufficient. He fights, he builds, he becomes, in the course of Stalin's remaining issues, increasingly erratic in the way that beings become erratic when they are compensating for a wound they cannot acknowledge. Nebula steals the gauntlet. The heroes regroup. The cosmic entities intervene. The resolution, when it comes, is almost accidental, a cascade of circumstances rather than a single decisive act. Thanos retreats to a farm where the final panels of the series find him sitting in the sun, a being who has lost the most powerful object in the universe and is, by some accounts, quietly relieved. The specific quality of this rejection is worth attending to, because it is the quality that determines what the alternate divergence consists of. Lady Death does not reject Thanos because the snap was wrong. She is not a moral authority in the ordinary sense, not organized around a distinction between acceptable and unacceptable acts. She rejects him because of what the snap reveals about his relationship with her. He performed it for her. He presented it as a gift, as evidence, as proof of devotion. And what she sees in the proof of devotion is something that has no devotion in it. The act of her being so absorbed in the demonstration of what he feels that the feeling itself is no longer present, replaced entirely by the demonstration. He loves the gesture more than he loves her. He has been loving the gesture more than he has loved her for a very long time, possibly from the beginning, because the gesture, the act of terrible service, the willingness to do what others could not, was always also the argument. It was always also the proof, directed not at her but at the woman in a hospital room who reached for something sharp. Lady Death recognized this. She turned away. The rejection is not a judgment of Thanos' capacity or his scale of action. It is the recognition that the thing he was offering her was not love. It was evidence. This distinction between the offer of love and the offer of evidence is the crack in the canonical story that the alternate history slips through. A being offering evidence can always offer more evidence. The failure of one proof leads to the construction of a larger proof, and a larger one, in an escalating series that has no logical terminus. because the audience the proof is actually intended for is not Lady Death at all, and has never been Lady Death, but a being who, in the moment the evidence is rejected, stops and asks what he was actually offering, what was underneath the gesture, has taken a step that the evidence-offering sequence cannot accommodate. He has stepped out of the sequence entirely. In the alternate timeline, the divergence is smaller than it appears from the outside. It is a half-second, perhaps less. The moment after Lady Death turns away, in the pause between her turning and Thanos' first impulse to respond to the turning, something happens that does not happen in the canonical story. Thanos does not turn outward. He does not reach for a new demonstration. He does not begin the process of escalation that will eventually produce the erratic behavior and the accidental resolution. He turns inward. He does something he has not done, by his own account in the Thanos Rising record, since he was a child in the clarifying light of Titan's afternoon. He asks himself what he actually wants, not what the philosophy requires, not what Lady Death has come to represent, not what the argument, built across 5 centuries with the methodical precision of the finest mind in the cosmos, demands as its logical conclusion. What he, Thanos, the child who sat at the edge of the plaza and felt the light move across the stone, who loved his mother and spent decades trying to understand what she had seen, what he actually wants. The distinction is one that would seem obvious to most beings. For Thanos, after centuries of operating as the embodiment of a philosophical position, it is a question he has not permitted himself to ask. The asking of it is, in its own way, the bravest thing he has ever done. The Gauntlet answers before he does. This is the moment that the 2021 What If animated series, in its MCU-adjacent treatment of similar material in Season 1, Episode 2, gestures toward but does not fully develop. The idea that the stones, in their generative orientation, respond to a genuine question about want differently than they respond to an expression of will. The stones are not passive, they are the operating system of a living universe. And a living universe, as the Ultimate's 2 cosmological records note, is in some sense aware of what is happening within it. When Thanos asks what he wants rather than asserting what he will do, the stones do not wait for instruction. They show him. They show him Titan. Not Titan as it collapsed. Not the overcrowded, resource-depleted, politically fractured moon that Thanos watched fail in the years before he left it. The moon whose collapse he later incorporated into his philosophy as evidence that his analysis of universal imbalance was correct. Not Titan as his campaigns left it. Empty, silent, the ruins of the crystalline city slowly filling with the dust of a moon that has stopped being inhabited. They show him Titan as it was, as he remembers it from the inside of his childhood, the terraced cities in the late afternoon, the crystal arrays channeling the sun's reflected light into the plazas at the angles the old architects designed, the particular blue-gold quality of the air, the proportions of the buildings holding their quiet calibration, the fountains, the sound of the fountains. He feels for the first time in centuries what the architects intended their city to produce: clarity, the sensation of a thought thinking itself through to its conclusion. He has been running an argument for so long with such complete absorption that he has forgotten what thinking without the argument feels like. The stones show him. They show him the city, and they show him the city empty, and then they show him, not prescriptively, not as a command but as a possibility, the way that a very good teacher shows a student an answer not to give it to them but to let them see that an answer exists, what it would look like for the city not to be empty. He does not close his fist. He is still in the half-second after Lady Death's turning. He is still in the pause. He is still at the moment where the canonical history goes one way and this alternate history goes another. And in the space of that half-second, holding the image of Titan as it was and understanding, with a precision that has never been anything other than extraordinary, that the stones he is holding are the architecture of making and not the architecture of ending, in that space, something completes itself. He opens his hand. Rest here for a moment, in the silence before the first act of creation. The garden has not been built yet. Titan has not been restored. The alternate history has not yet begun to unfold into all the things it will produce. The wonder, the difficulty, the discovery that will wait at the end of it. None of that has happened yet. What has happened is smaller. A being with 5 centuries of absolute certainty has asked himself a question he has not permitted himself to ask, and the universe has answered in a way that surprised him. He is standing in the half-second after Lady Death turned away, holding the gauntlet and feeling the weight of 6 stones, and for the first time in the history of their relationship, Thanos and the Infinity Stones are pointing in the same direction. Let yourself feel the quiet of that. The pause before the first note, the breath before the first word, the moment a hand opens instead of closes. The first thing Thanos does with the gauntlet in the creative direction is not the thing the heroes expected, and not the thing the cosmic entities prepared for, and not the thing that Lady Death, in the careful attention she maintains even in turning away, anticipated. He does not make himself more powerful. He does not rewrite the laws of the cosmos in his own image. He does not create a monument or a demonstration or anything that performs for an audience. He makes something small by the standards of the gauntlet. He makes something personal. He reaches back into the history of what existed before the snap, into the memory the stones hold of what the universe looked like before he subtracted from it, and he restores one thing, one world, one moon. He restores Titan. Let your body settle a little further. Let your shoulders drop one more small degree. The story is moving now into territory that has never been charted, because no version of these events was ever told this way before. Follow it slowly. There is no urgency here, only the steady unfolding of something that took 5 centuries to arrive at and cannot be hurried now. The restoration of Titan does not happen all at once. This is the first thing that distinguishes it from the snap, whose defining quality was its instantaneity, the way it folded across all of space simultaneously, touching every planet and every star system and every corner of the cosmos in the same heartbeat. The snap was force applied uniformly. The restoration of Titan is something different. It is more like memory. It is more like the way a mind reconstructs a place it has loved, not all at once, not in a single overwhelming image, but piece by piece, detail by detail, each element arriving in the order that feels most true to the place itself. The Space Stone moves first. In the cosmological records of the prescribed, the Space Stone is described as the force of placement, the quality that gives distance its meaning, that allows 2 things to be in different locations rather than the same one, that maintains the architecture of where. Under the Space Stone, Titan's geography begins to resolve. The rocky surface of the Moon, which over the centuries of abandonment had continued its slow geological processes, filling in the ruins of the terraced cities with the patient accumulation of dust and pressure and time, begins to shift, not violently, gradually in the way that soil remembers the shape it held before weight was placed on it. The terraces re-emerge from the debris that covered them, the streets clear, the plazas open. The geography of the city comes back first, like the outline of a drawing before the colour is added. The Time Stone comes next. Of the 6 stones, the Time Stone is the one that most complicates what might otherwise seem like a simple act of restoration, because the question it must answer is not only what Titan looked like, but when. Thanos is not restoring Titan to a random point in its history. He is restoring it to the specific period he carries in memory, the Golden Period, the period of the clarifying light and the calibrated buildings and the fountains in the plazas, the period before the resource depletion and the political fracturing that preceded the collapse. The Time Stone navigates backward through the Moon's geological and architectural record with the precision that is, in the cosmological documentation of how the stone actually operates, more like reading than rewriting, more like finding the page than changing the text. The record of what Titan was always present in the stones. They had simply not been asked to return to it before. The Reality Stone and the Mind Stone work together in the restoration in a way that the other stones do not. The Reality Stone governs the relationship between the possible and the actual. It is the stone that determines which of the infinite potential states of any given situation becomes the one that exists. Under the Reality Stone, the atmosphere of Titan begins to reconstruct itself. The specific compound mix that the Titan Eternals had refined over generations. The mixture that produced, in the late afternoon hours, that faint blue-gold quality the colonists documented as clarifying. The crystal arrays reassemble on the terraces, angling themselves at the geometries the old architects had calculated. The light catching on the newly restored crystals begins to do the thing it was designed to do, to channel and filter and redirect the sun's reflected light into the streets below, at angles that produce in the mind of any being who encounters them a specific quality of ease. The Mind Stone completes the picture in a way that does not have a simple physical description, because what it restores is not a physical thing. The Mind Stone seeds the restored city with memory. Not individual memory, not the specific recollections of any particular Titan Eternal, not the private archives of any single life. The collective memory of what Titan was, the understanding at the level of the city's own structure of what it was built to produce and why. The intention that was embedded in every proportion and every angle and every placement of every fountain. The restoration would not be complete without this. A city rebuilt to the physical specifications of the original, but stripped of its animating intention, would be a museum, not a home. The Mind Stone makes it a home again. The Soul Stone and the Power Stone complete what the others have begun. The Soul Stone in the cosmological records is described as the animating force, the quality that distinguishes the living from the non-living, the spark that makes a biological system more than a chemical one. Under the Soul Stone, the restored city of Titan begins to feel inhabited, in the way that a place feels inhabited not because anyone is in it yet, but because the quality that makes habitation possible has been returned to it. There is a warmth in the stone of the restored terraces that the stone of the ruins did not have, a quality of readiness. The Power Stone holds it all in place, the geography, the history, the atmosphere, the memory, the animating quality. It provides the sustaining force that ensures the restoration is not temporary, not a flash that will fade when Thanos turns his attention elsewhere, but permanent as any restoration can be. The whole process takes, by the measure of ordinary time, approximately 3 minutes. This is a fact that the Baxter Building's monitoring equipment, which Reed Richards had quietly redirected toward tracking Gauntlet activity after the resolution of the Infinity Gauntlet event, registers as the most unsettling data point in the post-snap period. Not the 3 minutes, not the specific stones used, or the order in which they were deployed, or the precise physical changes that occurred on Titan's surface. The most unsettling data point is the signature of the act itself. Every previous recorded use of the Gauntlet had produced a reading that Richards's instruments characterized as an event, a discrete intervention in the state of reality, a change imposed from outside. The restoration of Titan produces a reading the instruments characterize, after Richards spends several hours developing a new analytical framework to make sense of it, as a reconciliation. As if the universe's version of reality had always contained a living Titan, and what Thanos had done was locate that version and return to it. The Eternal who feels it most precisely and from the greatest distance is a woman named Elysius, whose history in the Marvel canon connects her to both Titan and Earth, and who by the time of the restoration is living on the Olympian continent, engaged in a period of quiet contemplation she's been conducting for several years. Elysius left Titan before the collapse, as part of a small group of Titan Eternals who dispersed to various locations across the solar system in the decades before the resource depletion reached its critical point, in the way that some beings have an instinct for the failing of things before the failing becomes undeniable. She has been carrying Titan in memory for a long time. Not as grief, exactly, because grief implies that you expect to stop feeling it, and she does not expect to stop, but as a permanent feature of her awareness, the way the loss of a world that was your first world becomes a permanent feature of the awareness of any being sensitive enough to have understood what they had while they had it. When the restoration happens, what she feels is not an image and not a sound and not any sensory data of the ordinary kind. It is the quality, the very specific quality of Titan's afternoon light, as it was processed through the crystal arrays and channeled into the city at the angles the architects of the classical period designed. She recognizes it the way you recognize a voice you have not heard in many years, not with uncertainty, not needing to place it, but with the immediate and total recognition that comes from something deeply lodged in the structure of who you are. She's in a field in ordinary Earth morning light when it arrives, and she sits down in the field without deciding to, and she holds it, this quality, this thing that has come back, this thing she had stopped believing would come back, with the particular care of something precious that is also fragile, because she has learned from experience that unexpected gifts require careful holding. This is what restoration feels like from a distance. Not arrival, not return. A change in what you are carrying. As if he had not imposed his will on the universe. as if he had followed the universe's own deeper preference. Across the cosmos, in places as scattered as the Shi'ar throne world and the ruins of the Kree homeworld Hala, and the empty corridors of a Sanctuary-class warship, drifting without crew in a distant sector, eternal survivors feel it. The Titan Eternals who escaped the moon's collapse over the centuries, the scattered few who had built their lives in other places, in other civilizations, in the patient and quiet way of beings who have learned to carry their home inside them because the home itself no longer exists, feel something change in the deep background of their awareness. Not a sound, not a vision, something more structural than either. The particular quality of Titan's afternoon, carried in their genetic memory across however many light years separate them from the moon they came from, becomes suddenly present. Alaz feels it in a garden on the Kree throne world, where he has been living for 40 years under a name that is not his own. He is tending a small bed of imported soil, growing plants that the Kree do not recognize but that he has cultivated from seeds he carried with him when he left Titan, seeds chosen for their scent and colour, with the aesthetic precision that his civilization passed into its children like a genetic inheritance. He's kneeling in the dirt when the quality changes, when the particular blue-gold quality of Titan's afternoon, not the colour, not the temperature, but the quality, the clarifying effect, surfaces in his awareness from a direction he had given up on decades ago. He stops moving. He stays very still. After a long time, he sets down what he is holding, and he sits down in the dirt between the plants, and he's quiet for a while in the way that old men are quiet when something they stopped believing in has just turned out to be true. His son is still alive. His son is alive and has done something that has no precedent in the history of any known civilization. He has held the most powerful object ever assembled and used it, not to erase, not to impose, but to give something back. The giving is imperfect. The eternal survivors will need to return before Titan is fully inhabited, and returning is not simple for beings who have built decades of life elsewhere. The restoration will raise questions about ownership and sovereignty, and what it means for a civilization to be revived by an act of will rather than an act of collective choice. These questions are real and serious, and will produce their own complications. But first, before the complications, there is this. The afternoon light on Titan is moving through crystal arrays again, and the fountains are running, and the proportions of the buildings are doing their quiet work. The universe has not seen a creation like this before. It is not sure what to make of it. Everything that has the capacity to observe what has just happened, and the things that have that capacity include several entities whose observational range is difficult to overstate, is, in its own way, very still. The stillness does not last. It never lasts in the Marvel cosmological tradition, when something unprecedented has occurred. The precedent creates a disturbance in the various systems, legal, philosophical, strategic, that the cosmos maintains to manage the behaviour of beings with extraordinary power, and the beings responsible for maintaining those systems begin, quietly and then less quietly, to look in the direction of Titan. Some of them look with relief, some with suspicion, some with something that in a being with a face would look like awe, and in a being without one registers differently but amounts to the same thing. The first act is not a hero, it is not a villain, it is the entity that exists specifically to adjudicate the space between those two categories, the entity that had been preparing, with the living tribunal's infinite patience, for a Thanos who destroyed, and now had to figure out what to do with a Thanos who had given something back. Let yourself breathe slowly with this next part. The scale of what the story is describing now, the scale of the things watching, the scale of the things deciding, is very large. But the way to hold large things is gently, not tightly. Let the scale be what it is. Let yourself be the size you are inside it. That is enough. The Living Tribunal was introduced in Marvel's Strange Tales der 150. Published in 1967, written by Stan Lee. A single immense figure, three-faced, representing the totality of the cosmos's own judicial function. It exists to adjudicate cosmic imbalance. The moments when a being or force or situation has accumulated enough power or influence to threaten the equilibrium of the universe as a whole, it is the last resort of cosmic law, the entity that intervenes when all other mechanisms of balance have failed. It had been watching the gauntlet since before Thanos assembled it. It had been preparing its response to the snap's aftermath when the snap was still in progress. It had its framework ready. The framework was designed for the Thanos who had destroyed. When the restoration of Titan registered in the Living Tribunal's awareness, and it registered immediately with the completeness that belongs to an entity whose awareness encompasses the entire structure of reality, the Tribunal did not move. This is the detail that every subsequent account of this moment emphasizes. The Living Tribunal, which in every previous crisis of comparable scale had moved within moments of the triggering event, held its position. It opened its unmasked face, the face that, in the canonical Marvel cosmological tradition, is always unmasked to represent equity, and it looked at what had just happened, and it held its position. Not because it was confused. The Living Tribunal is not capable of confusion in any meaningful sense. It held its position because it was applying a principle it had not expected to need, the principle that covers voluntary, unsolicited acts of cosmic repair. The principle existed. It was old, older than this iteration of the cosmos, carried forward from previous cosmic epochs in the accumulated jurisprudence of the Tribunal's function. But it had never been applied to a situation quite like this one, because no single being had previously held the full assembled gauntlet and used it to give something back rather than take something away. The principle had been written for other beings, other situations, other scales of action. Applying it to Thanos required a kind of jurisprudential creativity that even the Living Tribunal found, by its own standards, unusual. It held its position, and it watched. On the blue-white surface of the moon, in the crater that the Watcher Watu has occupied for most of human history, in the careful fulfillment of his species' vow of non-interference, something similar was happening. The Watchers do not express emotion in ways that map onto any familiar register of emotional expression, but the record of Watu's observational logs from this period, later accessed by Reed Richards in the course of his analysis of the post-Gauntlet era and referenced in the Fantastic Four's internal documentation, contains a data density anomaly at the moment of Titan's restoration. The logs show more data being recorded per unit time than at any previous point in Watu's observational record except for one, the moment of Thanos' original assembly of the Gauntlet. Watu was watching with more attention than he had ever given anything except the most critical threats to the universe's survival. What he was watching was not a threat, or it was a different kind of threat from the one he had been prepared to record. A Watcher's logs are designed to capture events that the universe's future generations need to know about. The snap had generated an enormous volume of that material. The restoration of Titan was generating a different kind, not the record of a catastrophe, but the record of a choice, and the choice was the kind that the universe genuinely had no precedent for at this scale and in this direction. The Celestials observed from their own vast distances, in the way that Celestials observe, not with urgency, not with the rapid response protocols of beings for whom individual events register as emergencies, but with the geological patience of entities whose attention is organized around spans of time that make individual events into patterns, and patterns into data points in something larger still. The Celestials had designed the eternal genome. They had seeded the Titan colony. Thanos was, in some sense, their experiment, the product of their genetic engineering, operating in an unexpected direction, a deviant expression of the eternal template they had crafted and placed on that moon. They had been watching the experiment for centuries. The snap had been a data point. The restoration of Titan was a different data point. What happens when an aberrant product of their engineering is given absolute power and at the last moment turns it toward the purpose the engineering was originally intended to serve? No one was more prepared for this moment, and less certain what to do with it than Adam Warlock. Adam Warlock, in the canonical resolution of the Infinity Gauntlet event, had been designated by the Living Tribunal as the being most suited to wield the gauntlet for purposes of cosmic good, only to have that designation revoked almost immediately on the grounds that good and evil existed in him, in too close a proximity to permit safe stewardship of absolute power. The revocation was documented in Warlock and the Infinity Watch No. 1, published by Marvel in 1992, and it had shaped Warlock's understanding of the gauntlet ever since. He knew, from the Tribunal's own ruling, that the gauntlet could not safely be wielded by any single being regardless of that being's intentions. The safeguard was not about virtue. It was about the incompatibility of singular will and absolute power, regardless of the direction that will was pointed. In this alternate history, the revocation never happened, because the tribunal had prepared to revoke the gauntlet from Thanos, not to award it to Warlock, and the sequence of events that led to Warlock's brief stewardship in the canonical story is not the sequence of events that occurred here. Warlock is free. He's watching from a position as close to Titan as he can reach in the time since the restoration began, in a small vessel he has used in other contexts and which carries, in its navigational logs, the coordinates of every significant cosmic event he has attended as a witness, an adversary, or a reluctant ally. He watches the restored city on Titan's surface through the vessel's observation panel, and he is quiet for a long time. Adam Warlock is not naive about Thanos. He has fought him. He has studied him. He has spent more careful attention on the analysis of Thanos' psychology and philosophy than perhaps any other being in the cosmos, because understanding Thanos had, for a significant period of his life, been a survival requirement. He knows the snap was not simply philosophy. He knows what Lady Death's rejection meant to Thanos. He knows the argument Thanos constructed, and he knows its flaw. Not that the flaw is in the argument itself, but that the argument was always, at its foundation, a response to a wound. A response to a mother who looked at her child and reached for something sharp. A response to a universe that had told him, in that first moment, that he was an ending rather than a beginning. Warlock's understanding of Thanos is unusual in a specific way. It is not primarily an understanding of what Thanos has done, but of what Thanos is. The acts, the campaigns, the snap, the long catalogue of destruction that the prescribed has documented across the centuries, are the record. Warlock has read the record, and it is thorough, and it is terrible, and it does not, in his analysis, constitute the essential understanding. The essential understanding is something he arrived at over years of thinking carefully about the question of how a being of extraordinary intelligence and extraordinary will arrives at a position as philosophically complete and practically catastrophic as the one Thanos built. The essential understanding is this: Thanos is a being who has been trying, from the first moment of his life, to prove something to someone who is not available to receive the proof. The someone is Sui-San. She died, in the canonical timeline, before Thanos' campaigns reached their full scale. She was dead for most of his active life, in whatever mode the dead are present to the living minds that carry them, not as a person who can respond, but as a judgment, delivered once in a hospital room on a moon of Saturn that has been sitting in the structure of every argument Thanos has built ever since. He has been building arguments at the scale of the cosmos that are, at their root, arguments addressed to a woman in a hospital room who reached for something sharp and was stopped. He has been trying to show her that the ending he represented was not a tragedy, but a gift. He has been trying to show her, across 5 centuries, that she was wrong to be afraid. Warlock has known this for a long time. What he has not known, what no analysis of the canonical record could tell him, because the canonical record does not contain it, is whether Thanos would ever stop trying to prove it. Whether the need for the proof was so deeply embedded in the architecture of who he was that no amount of capacity or intelligence or accumulated experience would be sufficient to dislodge it. The restoration of Titan is evidence that it can be dislodged. Not by external pressure. No external pressure has ever dislodged anything in Thanos, and it would not have started here. By internal process. By the same methodology that built the arguments, turned on the arguments themselves, and following them honestly to where they led. He has wondered across the years what would happen if the wound were addressed rather than argued away. Now he is looking at the answer. The power of the gauntlet was never the power of ending. That was the use Thanos made of it, for reasons rooted in his own history and psychology, but the power itself was always oriented in the other direction. The power was always the power of beginning. Thanos simply chose, for the first iteration of his use of it, the wrong verb. He chose to erase when the stones themselves inclined toward the act of writing. He chose subtraction when the instrument was designed for addition, and now, in this alternate half-second where a different choice was made, the instrument is doing what it was always inclined to do, and the cosmos is watching with the particular quality of attention you give to something you did not expect and cannot yet fully categorize. Let yourself rest in the quiet of this moment for a while. The living tribunal holds its position. The Watcher's logs accumulate at a density they have reached only once before. The Celestials observe with their geological patience. Adam Warlock watches through an observation panel and is quiet in the way he is quiet when understanding is arriving, and he does not want to rush it. The restored city on Titan catches the afternoon light in its crystal arrays and channels it into the plazas in the angles the old architects designed, and the clarifying effect moves through the empty streets of a home that has been rebuilt. The universe has received a gift it does not know how to accept yet. That is all right. Some gifts take time. Some things that are given back need to be held carefully before they can be used. The breath before the next thing is as important as the next thing. Rest here. Let the story hold still for a moment, in the afternoon light. The Silver Surfer, who had fought against Thanos in the canonical Infinity Gauntlet story, and who in the resolution of it had served as one of the primary forces of cosmic opposition, delivered his observational report to Reed Richards at the Baxter Building within hours of the restoration's completion. Richards read the report 3 times before he spoke. The power of the gauntlet was never the power of ending, he told his instruments. In the quiet of the building with its calculating machines and its collected data and its particular quality of a mind working at the limit of what a mind can hold. It was always the power of beginning. Thanos chose the first time the wrong verb. The question now, the question that the heroes, the cosmic entities, the Watchers, and the living tribunal would all need to answer, was what you did with a being who had made that choice once, and had now made the other choice, and who was sitting on a restored moon with 6 infinity stones, and no indication that he was finished. Let the story continue at its own pace. There is something in this next part that moves slowly enough to feel almost comfortable before it reveals what it is. Let it move at that pace. There is no need to anticipate the ending. The ending will come in its own time. Thanos does not leave Titan immediately. He stays on the restored moon for what would be, by any ordinary measure, a long time. Not days, weeks. He moves through the restored city in the way that a being moves through a place that holds something specific for them, carefully, with attention to each element, testing the reality of it against the memory. The crystal arrays are there, the plazas are there, the proportions of the buildings are doing their work. He sits in the central plaza on a morning when the crystal arrays are directing the sunrise light across the stone in a way that produces, even for a being of his particular psychology, a quality of stillness that has no better name than what the Titan Eternals gave it: clarifying. He understands, in those weeks on the restored moon, what the stones showed him in the half-second after Lady Death turned away. He understands it more completely than he understood it in that moment, because understanding something that the gauntlet has shown you is not instantaneous. It is a process, requiring the same kind of patient, methodical attention that he applied to everything else. He sees that the wound his mother gave him in the first moment of his life was real. He sees that the wound produced a real response. He sees that the response, the construction of a philosophy that made endings into gifts, that made the capacity for destruction into a vocation, was a logical response to the wound, internally consistent, followed through with extraordinary discipline and intelligence. He sees all of this, and he sees, with the same precision, that the response was wrong in the same way that his analysis of the cave was wrong, accurate without wisdom, perfectly organized around a center point that happened to be off by 1 degree, producing a structure that was internally sound and externally catastrophic. He had built an argument for subtraction. The stones had been trying all along to point him toward addition. The difficulty is that a being of Thanos' precision, once oriented toward a new understanding, cannot simply hold the understanding in the abstract. He is constitutively incapable of observing a problem without moving toward a solution. He has always been this way, the child in Aaron's Thanos Rising who could not watch a broken mechanism without disassembling it to find the fault, who could not hear an incomplete argument without following the logic to where it broke down. He is a being of application. Understanding and inaction are, for him, in a particular kind of tension. He sees the problem. He has an instrument that can address the problem. The instrument is on his hand. He begins to look outward. The first thing he sees when he extends his awareness through the space stone to the broader state of the cosmos is the Kree-Skrull War. The war is not new. It is among the oldest running conflicts in the documented history of the Marvel Universe, predating the current era by centuries, first rendered in its canonical Marvel form in Avengers issues 89 through 97, written by Roy Thomas in 1972, depicting a war of such duration and such mutual entrenchment that most of the intelligent civilizations in its vicinity have simply stopped registering it as a war and categorized it instead as a feature of the cosmic landscape. It has killed more beings across its centuries than most individual civilizations have ever produced. It is sustained not by genuine strategic necessity. Neither the Kree nor the Skrull have, for a very long time, had anything the other needs badly enough to justify the cost of continued conflict, but by the accumulated weight of history, by the way that a war long enough becomes its own justification, becomes the answer to the question of what we are for. Thanos knows this pattern. He has studied it in detail, as he has studied most things, with the precision of a mind that finds all systems interesting, and this system particularly instructive. In his original philosophy, the Kree-Skrull War was evidence of the resource strain that resulted from too many beings competing for too few resources, evidence that the universe's abundance of life was producing its own pathologies. He had planned, in the canonical timeline, to address it through the snaps arithmetic, removing half of both populations and presumably removing half the reason for the conflict. Now, with the stones and a different orientation, he sees the war differently. He sees it as a failure of imagination on both sides. He sees two civilizations locked in a version of the same mistake he made, organized around a wound so old that it has become the center of the structure, with the entire architecture of identity and purpose radiating outward from that center, with perfect internal consistency and producing, reliably, catastrophe. He could show them what a peace would look like, not impose it. He's being careful in these early weeks about the distinction between showing and imposing. He would use the reality stone to construct a vision, what Kree space and Skrull space would look like in 50 years if the war ended today, what they would gain, what the gain would feel like, in the specific sensory detail that the reality stone can render with extraordinary precision. He shows them. It takes 4 seconds. The reality stone constructs the vision with the completeness that it brings to everything it touches. Not a summary, not an argument, not a diplomat's abstract proposition about future benefit, but the actual sensory experience of the future peace, projected simultaneously into the awareness of every Kree and every Skrull who is currently alive. 4 seconds of what it would feel like for the war to be over. The warmth in the skin of a Kree soldier who has not felt safe since she was 16 years old. The particular quality of quiet in a Skrull city that has been mobilized for conflict for 3 generations and no longer knows what the peacetime version of itself sounds like. The relief, physical and immediate and overwhelming, of beings who have been carrying a weight so long they had forgotten what the unloaded version of themselves felt like. The Kree and Skrull stand down within a week. This is presented in the alternate history records with the brevity it actually occupied in time, and that brevity is itself worth attending to. A war that had killed more beings across its duration than most civilizations have ever produced. A war that the most sophisticated diplomatic efforts of the Shah and the Kree Imperial Court and the Skrull's own political apparatus had failed to resolve for centuries, ended in a week because Thanos showed them the alternative. Not forced them, showed them. He notes this. He notes it with the precision that he brings to everything, and what he notes is both the obvious thing, that the showing worked, that the stones are extraordinary instruments for precisely this kind of creative intervention, and the less obvious thing, the thing that sits at the edge of the observation and does not announce itself but is there when he looks carefully. Neither the Kree nor the Skrull were asked whether they wanted to see the vision. They received it because he decided to give it. The decision was his, made on their behalf without consultation, on the basis of his analysis that the war was a mistake and the peace was better. The analysis was correct. The peace is genuinely better than the war. No one who has experienced the vision wishes they had not received it. But the decision to give it was not theirs. The will behind the gift was not theirs. They have been moved, not erased, not subtracted from, but moved, by a force external to them, a force that examined their situation and determined what they needed and provided it without asking. He knows this feeling. He has been the instrument of it before, in a different direction. The motion is the same. The direction is different, the motion is the same. He does not stop immediately. He is too honest with himself, and too honest with the analysis the stones are providing to pretend that the analysis is wrong simply because he is uncomfortable with what it implies. He continues outward. He finds 3 species that the original Thanos, that earlier version of himself, the one who built the argument for subtraction, had destroyed in campaigns documented in the proscribed records, species with no survivors, no living representatives, no memory held by anyone except the stones themselves and the careful archive of the proscribed. He remakes them from the biological record the Soulstone holds, places them on worlds whose ecologies can sustain them, and gives them the life they had before his earlier self removed it. He creates a stable water cycle on the primary agricultural moon of a Shi'ar colony that has been in famine for 3 seasons, using the space stone to redirect water vapor from a nearby uninhabited system into a rainfall pattern that will sustain crops for decades without further intervention. He does these things, and each time the note at the edge of the observation is the same. He did not ask. The 3 species he remakes present the most complex version of this problem. They exist now. They have the right to exist. This is one of the positions the cosmic entities take in their ongoing assessment of the situation, and it is a position the Living Tribunal has not contested. The 3 species are real, and they have interests, and those interests deserve the same consideration given to any sentient species. This is not in dispute. What is in dispute, in the emerging cosmological jurisprudence of the post-Restoration period, is the question of whether the act that produced them was authorized in any sense the cosmic legal tradition recognizes. The 3 species cannot be asked whether they wish to be made. They did not exist before the making. There was no one there to ask. This is different from the Kree Skrull situation, where beings who already existed received a vision without their prior agreement. Here, consent was not merely absent, it was not possible. Thanos created new sentient life without authorization from any source external to his own will, and the new life he created has no relationship to that act except as its product. They exist. They did not choose to exist. They have capacities and desires, and an orientation toward their own survival and flourishing that is genuine and important. None of this was chosen by them. All of it was chosen by him. The distinction is not whether the outcome is good. The outcome is good. The distinction is the one that has been sitting at the edge of every observation since the Kree Skrull vision, growing clearer with each additional act. He is producing good outcomes by replacing the universe's choosing with his own. The replacement is the problem, not the outcome. The motion is the same whether the hand closes or opens. There is a concept in the philosophical traditions of the Titan Eternals, documented in the architectural records of the colony's classical period, and referenced in the cosmological literature that Adam Warlock later compiled in his capacity as the Infinity Watch's philosophical archivist, that the Titan Eternals called the weight of the unsolicited gift. The idea was that a gift given without being asked for, regardless of its quality and regardless of the genuine good intentions of the giver, contains within it a hidden weight. The weight of the relationship it creates between the giver and the recipient, a relationship in which the giver has, by the act of giving, assumed a position of authority over what the recipient needed. The Titan Eternals had believed that this weight was not a reason to avoid giving, but it was a reason to be careful about giving at scale. Thanos had grown up in the civilization that taught this. He had learned it, in the way that all things learned in childhood are learned, not as a principle to be applied consciously, but as a quality of the air you breathe in the place where you grew up. He was beginning to remember it now. He was beginning to remember it slowly, with the particular slowness of an understanding that is arriving through action rather than through thought, and what it was telling him was something that would require him to sit with it for a long time before he was ready to hear it. The story is slowing now, in the way that a day slows in the late afternoon, when the light changes quality, and the urgency of the earlier hours gives way to something more contemplative. Let your own pace slow with it. Let the next part of this story arrive at the speed it chooses. There is a garden ahead. It is worth arriving at without rushing. Thanos builds a garden on Titan. He builds it on the terrace above what used to be the central plaza. The terrace that catches the most afternoon light. The terrace where, on the days when the crystal arrays are angled precisely right, and the atmosphere is at the specific compound density, the Titan Eternals refined over generations, the clarifying effect is at its strongest. He does not use the gauntlet to build it. That is the first thing worth noting, and it is worth noting because it is a choice, and choices in beings of Thanos' will and capability are always deliberate. He builds the garden by hand. He brings soil from several sources, from the restored moon's own surface, which has a mineralogical composition that the Titan Eternals used in their public planting, and from 3 other worlds whose soil chemistry he knows from the biological records in the Soul Stone to be compatible with the plants he wants to grow. He moves the soil by hand. He builds the water features, not fountains exactly, though they share the aesthetic lineage of the fountains in the plazas below. The same understanding that moving water produces a specific quality of ambient sound that the Titan Eternals had incorporated into their urban design, as deliberately as they incorporated the crystal arrays. He lays the water channels with stone he cuts from the terrace's own rock face. He plants. The plants are chosen with the same care that the original Titan city planners brought to their planting programs, for colour, for scent, for the texture of their leaves against the hand, for the specific quality of movement they produce in a light wind. He chooses some that bloom in the morning and others that hold their colour through the afternoon, and others that are at their best in the quieter light of early evening, so that the garden has a rhythm, a daily sequence of emphasis, the way a piece of music has movements. He tends it daily. He waters it. He does the small adjustments of maintenance, the pruning, the repositioning of things that have grown into each other's light, the replacement of what has not survived, with the patience of a being for whom patience is not a virtue but a methodology. He knows what he is doing. He is, in some sense, building Titan's original argument, that the inner lives of the beings who inhabit a place are the proper responsibility of the place itself. He is building a space designed to produce clarity. He is building it for himself, because he needs clarity, because he is carrying the weight of the unsolicited gift, and he needs a space in which to hold it without having to act on it before he understands what it is. The days pass in the garden in a quality of quiet that Thanos, by his own admission in the records the prescribed compiled from this period, has not experienced since childhood. The afternoons are particularly good. The light moves through the crystal arrays in the plazas below and reaches the garden at the angle the architects intended, and the scent of the plants mixes with the specific compound quality of the restored atmosphere, and he sits with the gauntlet resting on his knee and the 6 stones holding their light, and he is close to something he has not been close to in a very long time. Peace. The quality of time in the garden is different from the quality of time in anything else Thanos has done. His campaigns had their own relationship with time, enormous stretches of travel and logistics punctuated by the concentrated moments of arrival and action, a rhythm that kept the active intelligence continuously engaged, that produced no significant gaps between analysis and application. Even in the months between the divergence and the building of the garden, the weeks of using the gauntlet in the creative direction, the shows of the reality stone, the remakings and the creations, the time had had that quality, the quality of purposeful forward motion. This is different. The garden has no forward motion. Each day arrives at approximately the same point as the previous day, with the same quality of light at the same hours and the same sequence of scents as the plants move through their daily rhythm, and the same sound from the water features and the same weight of the gauntlet on his knee in the afternoon. Nothing is building toward a resolution. Nothing is moving toward a culmination. The days are simply days, and each one is complete in itself, and this completeness, this self-containedness of each ordinary day, is something he has not experienced before and does not have immediate language for. He does not think too carefully in these days about what the note at the edge of the observation is telling him. He knows it is there. He does not push it away. He's too honest for that, but he does not pursue it either. He lets it sit in his peripheral awareness the way you let a pain sit when you're not yet ready to have it addressed. He is a being who has spent 5 centuries in absolute certainty, and the transition from certainty to something more complex requires its own kind of time. In the Baxter Building, Reed Richards is working. He is always working, in the way that is specific to very intelligent people who have found that work is the container they trust most to hold the things they cannot otherwise manage: anxiety, wonder, responsibility, grief. He has been working on the problem of the creative gauntlet since the restoration of Titan registered on his monitoring equipment, and the work has been producing results that he is not entirely sure he wants to have produced. Richards has been running the monitoring equipment continuously since the restoration of Titan registered on his instruments. Not because he knows what he's looking for, but because he is a scientist, and a scientist confronted with a truly unprecedented event understands that the most important data is often the data whose significance is not immediately apparent. He has programmed the equipment to look for anomalies not just in the obvious registers, energy output, matter state, spatial coordinates, temporal consistency, but in the negative space of those registers, the places where readings are absent that should be present, the zones where the cosmic background has a different texture than it does in the surrounding space, the regions where something that should be there is not there. This is not a standard monitoring protocol. It is the monitoring protocol of a mind that has encountered the gauntlet before and understands from that encounter that what the gauntlet leaves behind is often more revealing than what it produces. The result is this. The universe is full of small silences, not the vast silence left by the snap. That silence was catalogued, documented, and has been in the process of being addressed by the efforts of the surviving universe in the period between the snap and the restoration. This is different. These are small silences, distributed across the cosmic background in a pattern that Richards' instruments only detected because he had specifically programmed them to look for what is not there rather than what is. They are the cosmic background signature of things that were displaced by Thanos' acts of creation. Not destroyed, displaced. Every time the gauntlet had created something, it had done so by asserting a new state of reality over the existing one, and the existing state had not simply vanished. It had moved. It had been pushed to the margins of the created state, held in a kind of cosmological limbo, where it registered on instruments sensitive enough to find it as a small, persistent void, as an absence with a shape, as the outline of something that used to be there. The Grayskull piece is real and good, but in the cosmic background at the location of the Grayskull border, there are small silences that have the shape of the war. Richards takes a long time with this analysis. He checks his methodology. He runs the calculations from different starting assumptions. The result is consistent. Every act of creation left a displaced remainder, like the negative space of a sculpture, the outline of what had been there before the new thing was placed. He gives the report to the Silver Surfer. He asks the Surfer to carry it to Adam Warlock. Warlock receives the report in his vessel, still holding position near Titan. He reads it slowly, in the way he reads everything that requires careful understanding, not quickly, not with the urgency of a being trying to get through material, but with the full settled attention of a mind that has learned, across a long life with considerable darkness in it, that the most important things are the things that most require you to stay with them before you respond. He reads the report 3 times, and then he sets it down on the surface beside him, and he looks out the observation panel at Titan, where the garden is visible from orbit as a small patch of organized color on the terrace above the plaza, and where Thanos is sitting in the afternoon light, and he allows himself to feel what the report has made him feel before he decides what to do about it. The feeling is complicated. He had hoped, when he watched the restoration of Titan, that this was an uncomplicated good. He had held the possibility, and he is honest enough with himself to acknowledge that it was always a possibility rather than a certainty, that Thanos had genuinely understood something and was genuinely doing something right. The restoration of Titan was right. It was right in a way he can defend without reservation, philosophically and cosmologically, and in every other register he has available to him. What the displaced void suggests is not that the restoration was wrong, but that it was incomplete in a way that its maker did not intend and may not yet have recognized. He decides to go to Titan. He lands his vessel in the plaza below the garden, on the afternoon of a day when the light is particularly good, when the crystal arrays are catching the sun at precisely the angle the old architects designed, and the clarifying effect is moving through the stone of the plaza, in the quality the Titan colonists documented as the closest thing they had found to architectural medicine. He climbs the terrace stairs slowly, in the way of a being who is not in a hurry, and who is at the same time very much aware of what he's about to say. Rest here for a moment, in the garden. Let the afternoon light be what it is. The scent of the plants is in the air, not strongly, not overwhelmingly, but present, the way things that are well chosen are present without demanding attention. The water features are doing their work, producing that specific quality of ambient sound that the Titan Eternals knew could hold the mind at the surface of its own quiet. Thanos sits in the garden he built with his hands, in the afternoon light of the civilization his mother built, with the gauntlet resting on his knee and the 6 stones holding their light. He is as close to peace as he has been in 500 years. He does not know yet about the small silences in the cosmic background. He does not know yet what Adam Warlock has come to tell him. He is in the good moment before the harder understanding. Let yourself be in it with him. Let the garden be what it is. The harder understanding will come in its own time. What Adam Warlock comes to tell Thanos in the Garden on Titan is not a condemnation. Warlock is too careful a thinker and too honest about his own history to approach this as a condemnation. He comes as something closer to a colleague, a being who has also, in his own history, made the mistake of believing that his understanding of what the universe needed was sufficient authorization to provide it, and who has learned, at considerable cost, that the gap between correct analysis and appropriate action is one of the most important gaps in the cosmos and one of the most consistently underestimated ones. What he comes to tell Thanos is what Reed Richards found in the cosmic background, and what that finding means. Let yourself breathe a little more slowly. The story is arriving now at the centre of what it has been building toward, not the climax, not yet, but the understanding that makes the climax possible. The understanding arrives the way most real understandings arrive, not as a revelation, but as a recognition, something that was already present in the data, waiting to be assembled. Let it arrive at that pace. Warlock and Thanos sit together in the garden on Titan in the afternoon light, with the water features doing their work in the background, and the scent of the plants in the air, and the crystal arrays below them channeling the sun's reflection into the plaza. If anyone had been watching from a sufficient distance, the scene would have appeared unremarkable. Two beings sitting in a garden, talking. The scale of what they were talking about would not have been visible from outside. Warlock describes the voids. He describes them in the precise, unhurried language that is his characteristic register, drawing on Richards's data, but not hiding behind it, making clear that the analysis is Richards's, but the interpretation is his, and that he is presenting the interpretation not as a verdict, but as what it actually is, an observation that requires a response. He describes the shape of the void at the Kree-Skrull border, the outline of the war that the piece displaced, the negative space of the old reality persisting in the cosmic background like an afterimage. He describes the smaller voids left by the 3 remade species and the Shi'ar water cycle, and the other interventions Thanos has made in the weeks since the restoration of Titan. Thanos listens. He is the best listener in this cosmos when he chooses to listen. His precision extends to auditory comprehension, to the capacity to take in complex information completely on the first pass, without the distortions that most minds introduce through the filter of what they expect to hear. He listens to the description of the voids, and he does what he always does. He assembles the data into the clearest possible picture of what it means. The picture it means is this. Every act of creation at the scale the gauntlet permits displaces something that already existed. Not because the universe lacks room for new things. The universe is, by any reasonable measure, large enough to contain what Thanos has been making without strain. The displacement is not a physical capacity issue, it is a will issue. The Gauntlet's creative acts operate by asserting a new state of reality over the existing state, and the assertion is backed by Thanos' will, which is absolute and singular, and not shared with anyone. When his will asserts that a piece exists, the war moves. Not out of existence, the displaced reality is not destroyed. As the void signatures demonstrate, it is held in cosmological limbo. But it is moved without its consent. The war did not agree to be displaced. The war was simply overwritten by a will powerful enough to overwrite it. He had been erasing, not in the direction of the snap, not subtraction, not the removal of things from existence, but erasing in a new direction, the displacement of things that existed in favour of things he preferred to exist instead. The aesthetic of the act was entirely different. The structure of the act was entirely the same. Warlock says this plainly, in the garden, in the afternoon light. He says it the way he says everything important, without drama, without the kind of escalating rhetoric that demands an emotional response before the intellectual one has had a chance to form. He says it, and then he is quiet, giving Thanos the space to sit with it, because he knows that Thanos' first response to important information is never the important one. The important response comes after the first one, after the initial reaction has been examined and set aside, after the precision has been applied. Thanos is quiet for a long time. The afternoon moves through the garden. The quality of the light shifts. in the way it shifts on Titan in the hours between mid-afternoon and early evening, from the clarifying blue-gold of peak afternoon to something warmer and less precise, something that the Titan Eternal's architectural records describe as the settling quality, the light of the time of day when the mind begins to release the concerns of the active hours and move toward the different quality of attention that evening permits. He sits in the settling quality of Titan's afternoon and applies his precision to what Warlock has told him. He finds the flaw in his own argument quickly. The argument had been, creation is better than destruction. The argument was internally sound. Creation does not end things. Creation does not remove what exists. Creation adds, and addition is the direction the stones are oriented in, and therefore using the stones for creation is using them correctly, in alignment with their nature rather than against it. The argument followed. But it had been missing a variable that he had not included in the calculation, and the missing variable was this, the will behind the creation. The stones are generative. But the gauntlet is the concentrated expression of a singular will, and a singular will applied at absolute scale does not add without also imposing. The gauntlet does not create through suggestion, or through offering, or through the kind of generative pressure that the universe's natural creative processes operate through. The slow pressure of evolution, of cultural development, of the particular solutions that specific civilizations arrive at through the specific circumstances of their specific histories. The gauntlet creates through assertion, through the imposition of one being's preferred reality over the reality that exists. The direction of the imposition has changed. The nature of the imposition has not. He had built an argument for creation over destruction. The argument was better than the one for destruction. He's clear about this, and Warlock does not contest it. The peace between the Kree and the Skrull is genuinely better than the war. The three remade species have a genuine right to exist. The Shi'ar agricultural moon is genuinely improved by having a reliable water cycle. These are not errors, they are good things, correctly identified as good, produced by a capacity for analysis that remains extraordinary in a being who has spent centuries pointing it in the wrong direction. But good things created without consent are still impositions. The gift that was not asked for carries a weight that the gift asked for does not. And at the scale of the gauntlet, the weight of the unsolicited gift is the weight of one being's absolute authority over what reality should contain. The three children in the cave, the snap, the restoration of Titan, the corrected Kree-Skrull war, the three remade species, the water for the Shi'ar moon, different acts, different aesthetics, different directions, the same motion, Thanos asserting his will over the universe at the largest possible scale, on the basis of his analysis of what the universe needed, without consulting the universe. The universe feared what Thanos would erase. It was now learning what he would write, and what it was learning was that the writing and the erasing were always the same gesture, performed by the same hand, backed by the same singular absolute will, in the service of the same fundamental conviction that the universe was his to edit. He knows this before Warlock finishes speaking. He has assembled the picture that quickly. And what he does with it, in the settling light of Titan's afternoon, is not deny it, and not argue with it, and not construct a counter-argument from the available data in the way that a less honest mind would attempt. He sits with it. He holds it the way the garden holds its plants, with the patient, open, accepting quality of a space designed to let things be what they are. Warlock stays in the garden for 2 days. This is longer than most beings would stay, given who they were with and what was resting on the stone between them. He stays because he understands something about the way Thanos processes important information, that the first response is never the important one, that what matters is what happens after the first response has been examined and set aside, and the precision has been brought to bear on what remains. He stays to be a witness to that process, because it requires a witness, and because he is, at this point, perhaps the only being in the cosmos who understands both the necessity of what Thanos is processing and the difficulty of processing it. They talk about the displaced voids in the practical terms, about Richard's methodology, about the possible mechanisms through which the displaced realities might be reintegrated over time, about whether the reintegration is better accomplished with the Gauntlet's assistance or through the universe's own slower processes. Thanos' instincts push toward the Gauntlet, because the Gauntlet could do in minutes what would otherwise take centuries. Warlock engages with these instincts directly, without dismissing them, because the instincts are not wrong in their analysis of capability. They are revealing the pattern. The instinct toward using the extraordinary capacity to address the problem faster is always present, and it is always correct about what the capacity can do, and it always carries with it the cost that was not calculated. The displacement voids were themselves the cost of the last intervention. A gauntlet-mediated reintegration would produce its own displaced remainder. The solution cannot use the instrument that created the problem. On the second day, after the analytical layer has been as thoroughly worked as it can be, Warlock asks about Suisan. He asks directly, in the way only a being of considerable trust would ask, not as an accusation, not as a psychological diagnosis, but as a genuine inquiry, the kind that treats the answer as worth knowing. Thanos is quiet for a long time. When he speaks, it is not with the precision and brevity that characterize his usual engagement with important material. He speaks slowly, in the settling light of Titan's afternoon, and what he speaks about is not the incident in the hospital room, not the fear in her face, not the reaching for something sharp. He speaks about the times when she looked at him and did not reach for anything, when the fear was absent and the mother was present. There were more of those times than the histories suggest. The histories have a way of organizing around the loudest data, and the loudest data from Suisan was one moment, and the quieter data was years of ordinary afternoons that did not make it into any record at all. After a long time, he says to Warlock, "I have been doing the same thing." Warlock says, "Yes." The water features run. The scent of the plants moves through the air. The light in the garden is in its settling quality now, and the plaza below is filling with the kind of early evening quiet that the Titan Eternals had designed into their city's acoustic architecture, as deliberately as they designed the noontime clarity. The sounds the city makes at this hour are softer, longer, with more space between them. The fountains are the loudest thing. The conversation continues into the evening, and what it produces is not a decision, not yet. A decision requires understanding, and the understanding is still arriving piece by piece, with the methodical pace of a very serious mind that refuses to arrive at a conclusion before it has all the data. But the direction the understanding is moving in is clear, and it leads with the same logical inevitability that all of Thanos' most serious understandings produce, toward a choice that he has never in 5 centuries of existence made, and that no version of himself, not the destroyer, not the philosopher, not the gardener he has become in these weeks on Titan, has ever previously had the capacity to make. The choice is not between creation and destruction. He understands that now. He has always been capable of understanding that. The choice is something else, something harder, something that requires not the exercise of his extraordinary will, but the suspension of it. Let the story settle into this final movement. The pace of the narration is slower now than it was when we began. That slowing is deliberate, and if you feel it, let yourself slow with it. The things that remain to be said are quiet things. They arrive best in a quiet register. Breathe in once, slowly, and let yourself arrive at the end of this together. Thanos does not sleep. This is not a metaphor, and it is not a symptom of distress. It is a biological fact of the deviant eternal physiology, documented in the Shi'ar medical records that catalogued his species composition after the canonical Infinity Gauntlet event. He does not require sleep. But he has periods, long, settled, motionless periods, that function for him as sleep functions for most beings, as a time when the mind, released from the active demands of external engagement, works through what has been given to it in the waking hours. He enters such a period in the garden, in the night after his conversation with Warlock, sitting in the stillness of Titan in its dark hours with the gauntlet on his knee, and the 6 stones holding their light, and the faint sound of the water features and the smell of the plants, and the particular quality of Titan's night air, which is different from the daytime quality, in a way the Titan Eternals never found a precise word for, but that the colonists consistently described in their personal records as the air of honest things, the air of honest things. He holds the understanding he has arrived at, the understanding that creation at the scale of the gauntlet is imposition in a new direction, that the will behind his acts of making is the same will that was behind his acts of erasing, that the direction has changed and the nature has not, and he holds it without acting on it. He lets it be present. He has spent 5 centuries as a being who, having understood something, moved immediately toward its application. He's trying, in the garden, in the honest air of Titan's dark, to do something different, to let the understanding complete itself before he reaches for what the understanding requires of him. The understanding is completing itself slowly. What it is completing itself into is this: the 6 infinity stones are the generative forces of the universe itself. Together, they constitute what the Ultimate's 2 cosmological records call the operating substrate of reality, the mechanism through which the universe produces itself continuously, choosing from its infinite potential states the states that become actual. For one being to hold all 6 simultaneously is for one being's will to become, in the most literal available sense, the universe's own selection mechanism. The universe stops choosing its own states and begins choosing the states that the gauntlet-bearing will prefers. This is what the snap was. And this, Thanos understands in the garden, is also what the restoration of Titan is, and the peace between the Kree and the Skrull, and the 3 remade species, and the water for the Shi'ar moon. The universe's own choosing has been replaced in each of those cases by his choosing. He has been the universe's will for months, and the universe has not agreed to this, and the displacement voids in the cosmic background are the universe's own record of what was present before his will replaced it. To use the gauntlet in any direction is to silence the universe and replace its voice with his. In the 1992 follow-up to Stalin's Infinity Gauntlet event, the Infinity War storyline, the cosmic entities made this principle into cosmic law. No singular will, however well-intentioned, is appropriate to wield the power of all 6 stones simultaneously. They stripped the gauntlet of its power after the events of the first story, not because Thanos had used it badly, though he had, but because the fundamental problem was not what he had used it for, but the fact of the singular will itself. One mind replacing the universe's own choosing is the problem. The problem exists regardless of what the mind chooses. Thanos has arrived at this principle on his own, through his own analysis, in a garden on Titan in the honest air of a dark hour. He has arrived at it the same way he has arrived at every understanding in his life, methodically, from first principles, following the logic wherever it led without allowing the discomfort of the destination to alter the route. He has arrived, in short, at the conclusion that the living tribunal reached before him and that the cosmic entities enshrined as law after him. But he has arrived at it from the inside. The choice this leaves him with is the one that the philosophers of every tradition the Marvel Universe contains have treated in their various ways as the most fundamental moral question available. Given the capacity to impose your will on the world, what is the proper exercise of that capacity? The traditions divide on this question. Some say, use the capacity in the service of good, because the alternative is to waste a resource the world needs. Some say, the capacity must be set aside entirely, because no being is qualified to determine for others what good consists of. Some occupy the complicated middle, arguing that the answer varies by context, by scale, by the specific relationship between the capacity and the circumstance. Thanos has lived for 5 centuries in the first camp, the camp that says the capacity must be used, that the exceptional ability imposes an obligation to the exceptional act. His philosophy of universal balance was, at its root, this argument. I can see what is needed. I have the capacity to provide it. The obligation follows from the conjunction of seeing and capacity. This argument is not ridiculous. It has been made by serious beings in serious philosophical traditions across the history of the cosmos, and it has produced, when held by minds of genuine precision and genuine concern for the universe's well-being, genuine goods. It has also produced the snap. The garden in the early hours before dawn is very still. The water features continue their work. The scent of the plants has shifted, in the way that garden scents shift in the dark hours, towards something cooler and more specific, less ambient and more precise. The stones hold their light in the darkness without adding to it. 6 points of quiet colour in the dark of a restored world. He sits with the choice in the way he sat in the cave as a boy, in the dark with the stillness, finding the stillness interesting rather than frightening. The quality is similar. The scale is different. This stillness contains something the cave did not. The recognition, fully assembled and held without flinching, that he has been making the wrong choice in 2 directions for 5 centuries, and that the right choice requires not choosing. Not in the sense of avoidance, Not in the sense of paralysis, not in the sense of a being too overwhelmed by the complexity of the decision to act. In the specific and demanding sense of a being who has understood that the exercise of his extraordinary will, even in the direction of creation, even toward genuinely good ends, is not the appropriate relationship between his capacity and the universe. The universe does not need his will, not less of it, not in a different direction, not aimed more carefully or applied more gently or restricted to the most important problems. The universe needs him to choose not to impose it at all. And this choice, this specific, radical, unprecedented choice, is the hardest thing a being of his nature has ever been asked to make. He is a being constituted by will. His will has been the most consistent feature of his existence across 5 centuries and through every transformation his understanding has undergone. To set the will down is to set down the organizing principle of his identity. But he has been sitting in a garden he built with his hands, tending plants, watching the light, and he has felt what the Titan Eternals called the clarifying effect, and what it has clarified is this: he does not have to be the thing his mother saw. The garden in the early hours before dawn has a specific quality that the late afternoon does not. The plants are quieter, the scent is cooler and more specific, less diffused through the warmth of the afternoon air, and more concentrated, present in the way that things are present in the dark when there is no visual information competing with the other senses. The water features produce a sound that is more audible in the absence of the ambient noise of a city beginning its day, a sound that the Titan Eternals acoustic records characterize as closest to what they called the sound of completion, the sound of something that is doing precisely what it was made to do, without any component of effort or strain. The gauntlet rests on the stone. The 6 stones hold their light without adding to the darkness, the way that a very contained thing holds its quality without broadcasting it into the surrounding space. He sits beside the gauntlet and the gauntlet sits beside him, and between them there is, for the first time in months, something that is not intention. Not the intention to create, not the intention to correct, not the intention to improve. The absence of intention, which is not the same as emptiness. It is the quality of a hand that is open and does not need to be closed. He does not have to be an ending. He does not have to be a beginning either, in the sense of a will imposing a new beginning on a universe that did not request it. He can be something the histories of Thanos have no category for, a being who is present in the universe without asserting his will over it, a being who watches the light and tends the plants, and holds the gauntlet and chooses, each day, not to use it. He came carrying the capacity for infinite creation. In the first version of this history, he used that capacity for infinite destruction. In this version, he used it for creation, and discovered that creation and destruction at this scale are the same act. The act of one will replacing the universe's own choosing. The difference between this Thanos and the Thanos who snapped his fingers is not destruction versus creation. The difference is whether he could finally, after 5 centuries of absolute certainty, learn the thing his mother's civilization had tried to teach him in every proportion of every building, and every angle of every crystal array, and every carefully placed fountain in every plaza. That the proper relationship between an extraordinary intelligence and its world is not imposition, but participation. Not authorship, but presence. Not the God who writes the story, but the mind that is grateful to be in it. He sets the gauntlet down. Not all at once, in the sense that the decision, like all of his real decisions, arrives through stages rather than as a single moment of resolution. First, there is the understanding complete and examined from every available angle. Then there is the period of sitting with the understanding, which takes longer than the examination itself, because understanding is an intellectual event and the thing that follows it is something more structural, the reorganization of identity around a conclusion that changes what you are. He has been, for 5 centuries, a being defined by the exercise of his will at the largest possible scale. To set the will down is to set down the organizing principle of his existence. He's doing this slowly, with the same care he brought to the construction of the garden, tending the process the way he tends the plants, daily with attention to each element, without forcing anything toward completion before it is ready. The daily practice of not using the gauntlet is not simple. He holds it every morning, and every morning the same analysis runs. Here is a problem, here is the capacity to address it, here is what addressing it would look like. The analysis is always correct about the problem and always correct about the capacity. The analysis is not the decision. The decision is what comes after the analysis. The moment where he applies the understanding from the garden, from the conversation with Warlock, from the 2 days of honest examination of what he's been doing in the creative direction, that the capacity to address the problem does not constitute the authorization to address it, and that the authorization, if it exists at all, cannot come from him. He holds the gauntlet, and does not use it. He puts it down on the stone, he tends the plants, he watches the afternoon light, he does this again the next morning. The accumulation of these mornings is not nothing. It is, in the view of the cosmological scholars who later study this period, one of the most significant acts of voluntary restraint in the recorded history of any being in the Marvel Universe, not because the restraint is performed on any single occasion, but because it is performed repeatedly, in ordinary circumstances without an audience, on the basis of an understanding arrived at by the being doing the restraining, without coercion and without external enforcement. This is different from confiscation. It is different from the stripping of power by the living tribunal or the defeat by heroes. It is a being of absolute capacity choosing, each day, not to exercise it. The choosing is the act. The accumulated choosing is the legacy. Not dramatically. Not with a speech or a gesture designed for an audience. He sets it down in the garden, on the flat stone beside the nearest water feature, in the earliest light of Titan's morning, and he rests his bare hand on the stone beside it. The stones do not go dark. They hold their light quietly, the way instruments hold their readiness in the absence of use, not depleted, not dormant, simply waiting, as they have always been waiting, for a will to align with their nature or choose not to. Rest here for a while, in the earliest light of Titan's morning. The garden is around you, in the way that a garden is around you in the early hours when the light is just beginning to define the shapes of things without yet filling them with colour. The water features run. The scent of the plants is in the cool air. The gauntlet rests on the stone and its stones hold their light, and Thanos rests his bare hand on the stone beside it. He has made the choice that 5 centuries of absolute certainty had made impossible. He has set down the most powerful object ever assembled, in a garden, in the honest air of early morning by himself, because it was the right thing to do. No hero stopped him. No cosmic entity intervened. The living tribunal issued no ruling. He understood what was needed and he chose it, which is the only way that what was needed could have been given. The morning light is coming in now through the crystal arrays, and it has that particular quality of Titan's early light. Not yet the clarifying quality of full afternoon, but something quieter, something more open, something that the Titan Eternals never gave a name to, because it was the light that came before the city woke up, and there was no one yet for whom to document its effect. You are here for it. That is enough. The question the universe faces now, in the aftermath of this choice, is one it has no existing framework for. The heroic framework assumes the threat is ongoing, the villain still active, the power still in play. The judicial framework assumes an intervention is needed, a ruling is required, a punishment or a containment is appropriate. Neither framework applies to a being who has set down the gauntlet voluntarily, in a garden, and is sitting beside it in the early morning light with his hand on the stone. The universe has been preparing for every version of Thanos except this one. What it does with this version, what the cosmos and the heroes and the cosmic entities and the eternal survivors returning slowly to the restored moon of their civilization, and one old man in a colony garden on a Kree world who felt the restored light of Titan in his awareness and began quietly to make his way home, is the question the coda answers. Let the final part of this story arrive slowly. There is no urgency in what remains to be told. The urgency has passed. It passed in the garden, in the early morning, when something was set down. What remains is quieter. What remains is what is left after a very long story has reached the place it was always moving toward, and the moving is finished, and there is simply the place itself, and the quality of the light in it, and the sounds of a world that is still here. The universe does not know initially what to do with a Thanos who has set down the gauntlet. This is not a small problem. The protocols that the various cosmic organizations and heroic coalitions and judicial bodies maintain for responding to gauntlet-level threats are all premised on the assumption that the threat is ongoing, that the power is being used, that an intervention is necessary, that there is something to oppose. The Avengers have response plans. The Living Tribunal has a framework for adjudication. The Watchers have a category for events of this magnitude. None of those plans and frameworks and categories apply cleanly to a being who has placed the most powerful object in the known cosmos on a stone in a garden on a restored moon of Saturn and appears to be watering plants. Reed Richards is the first to go to Titan. He goes not as a hero, not in the capacity that his decades of experience fighting world-ending threats has developed in him, but in the capacity he had before any of that, the capacity he has always been most fundamentally himself in, as a scientist with a notebook who wants to understand something. He arrives with the data on the displaced voids and the monitoring equipment's readings of the restoration, and a set of questions that he is aware may not be answerable, but that he cannot stop himself from carrying. He finds Thanos in the garden as expected. He asks his questions. Thanos answers them with the same precision and patience that characterize all of his exchanges with minds he considers capable of using what he gives them accurately, which is a small category, and Richards is in it. The conversation between them is documented in the Fantastic Four's internal archives as one of the longest and most analytically dense exchanges in the team's recorded history. It covers the nature of the stones, the cosmological implications of creative versus destructive use of the gauntlet, the mathematical relationship between singular will and the universe's own choosing, and the question, which Richards raises and Thanos answers with something close to gentleness, of whether the displaced voids can be resolved without using the gauntlet again. The answer, after considerable joint analysis, is yes. The displaced realities are holding in cosmological limbo, not degrading. They can, over a span of centuries, be reintegrated into the cosmic background through a process that does not require the gauntlet tool. A process that is slower than what the gauntlet could provide, but that does not carry the imposition cost, because it operates through the universe's own pressure, rather than through a singular will replacing the universe's choosing. Thanos does not use the gauntlet to accelerate the process. Richards notes this in his archive of the conversation, and he notes it without comment, and the absence of comment is itself a kind of comment. He expected the offer of a faster solution to be refused, and it was, and the refusal tells him something important about what has changed in the being sitting across from him in a garden that smells of soil and water, and the specific compound quality of Titan's restored air. The Living Tribunal issues a ruling, eventually. The ruling is unprecedented in its structure, which is something the Tribunal acknowledges in its own language. A language that does not precisely accommodate acknowledgement, but that the cosmological scholars who study Tribunal rulings have learned to read for the places where the formulation is slightly different from any precedent. The ruling holds that the gauntlet remains on Titan, in Thanos' custody, under conditions that the Tribunal articulates as voluntary non-use, not a confiscation, not a forced limitation, but a documented recognition of a choice made voluntarily by the gauntlet bearer, and of the Tribunal's intent to maintain awareness of whether that choice continues. It is, the cosmological scholars note, the only Tribunal ruling in recorded history that treats the solution as the choice of the entity most capable of causing the problem, rather than the imposition of a constraint by the Tribunal itself. The Tribunal has never had occasion to issue such a ruling before. The occasion has never existed. Adam Warlock, in a report filed with the Infinity Watch's Philosophical Archive, and later reproduced in the scholarly record of the post-Gauntlet era, writes the most careful summary available of what this alternate Thanos represents in the history of cosmic being. He writes, "A being of extraordinary capacity chose, at the moment of that capacity's fullest expression, to understand the difference between what he could do and what was appropriate to do." He writes, "This is the distinction that defines the character of every being who holds power, at every scale of power, in every circumstance in which power is held. The question is never whether you have the capacity to impose your vision of what is good. The question is whether you understand that the capacity does not constitute the authorization." He writes, "Thanos, who had organized 5 centuries of his existence around the conviction that extraordinary capacity was its own authorization, arrived at the other understanding by following his own most rigorous analytical process to its actual conclusion." He writes, in the closing line of the report, "This is not a story about goodness. It is a story about precision, the same precision that produced the snap produced, when applied honestly, the garden." The eternal survivors return to Titan slowly, over the months that follow. They return in the way that people return to a home they stopped believing in, tentatively testing the air, looking to see if what they remember is what they find, not sure how to carry the years of absence inside the renewed fact of presence. Thanos does not meet them at the terrace. He stays in the garden in the afternoons and lets them find their way to the city in their own time and at their own pace. Some of them come to the garden, some of them do not yet. He tends what he has grown, and lets what is being rebuilt be rebuilt around him without directing it. The return of the eternal survivors takes longer than the physical restoration of the city. This is, in the observation of the prescribed sociological archivist who documents the process, the more interesting of the two events. The physical restoration was extraordinary, but it was a single act of enormous capacity. The return is something more complex, a long, hesitant, individually negotiated process in which each returning Eternal makes their own decision at their own pace, on the basis of their own relationship with what Titan was, and what it now is, and what it means to go back to a place you had stopped believing in. Some return quickly, with the urgency of beings who have been waiting for permission they did not know they needed, and who, having received it, do not want to wait any longer. Some take months, some take years, some are still making their decision, years after the restoration, in the way that some decisions cannot be rushed. The city fills slowly. Each returning Eternal brings something with them, not just their presence, but the particular quality of life they have been living elsewhere, the skills and relationships and aesthetic sensibilities they developed in their years of dispersion, the ways in which the Titan they left and the Titan they return to will have to negotiate each other. The city that results from this process is not identical to the one that was restored. It is the restored version plus what the survivors bring to it, continuous with the history of Titan and also changed by it, the way any living place is changed by the lives of the people who inhabit it. The architects who designed the original city built it to be changed this way, built it with the understanding that the intention embedded in the proportions and the light and the water was a starting point, not a conclusion, and that the people who lived in it would take that starting point and produce from it something the architects had not designed and could not have predicted. The city is doing what it was built to do. Thanos watches this from the garden in the afternoons, as the weeks and months pass and the sound of the city grows more complex with the accumulating textures of habitation, the small sound signatures of beings moving through a place they consider home, the particular quality of ambient noise that a city acquires when it is being lived in rather than merely occupied. He watches it without directing it. He has cleared the space and prepared the conditions. The civilization growing in it now is not his creation, in the sense that the Gauntlet's assertions were creations. It is the Titan Eternal's creation. He gave them back their starting point. Allah's comes last, as Thanos expected. He expected this not because he calculated it, but because he knows his father, in the way that you know a person you have studied with extraordinary precision and also loved in a complicated way across a very long span of time. Allah's comes on a morning in the third month of the return, when the city below the terrace is beginning to sound like a city again, beginning to accumulate the ambient textures of habitation, the small sound signatures of beings moving through a place they consider home. He climbs the stairs to the garden slowly, in the way of old age, and Thanos watches him come without speaking. Alas reaches the garden and stands at its edge for a while, looking at what his son built. The plants are in good health, the water features are running. The proportions of the space have the quality that the Titan Eternal's aesthetic tradition would recognize. Not the same garden that any Titan garden builder would have made, but built in the same spirit, with the same understanding of what a well-made space should do to the people in it. They sit together in the afternoon light for a long time. Neither of them speaks for a very long time. What this version of Thanos demonstrates is not that the mad Titan had goodness in him, though perhaps he did, in the way that every being has a version of goodness in them that the circumstances of their lives either permit or prevent from expressing itself. What it demonstrates is something more specific and more applicable and more worth carrying when you leave this garden and this story and return to whatever waits for you outside them. It demonstrates that the quality that made Thanos the most dangerous being in the known cosmos, that extraordinary, relentless, cosmos-spanning will, that capacity for absolute precision applied to the largest available problem, was not, in itself, the problem. The direction of the will was the problem. The assumption that the cosmos required his intervention was the problem. The precision without wisdom was the problem. The gifts were never wrong. They were aimed wrong for a very long time by a being who was asking the right question and had never been helped to find the right answer, and who carried, all along, in the same hand that held the gauntlet, the capacity to find it on his own. He was always capable of this. The universe feared what Thanos would erase. It never considered what he might give. And what he gave, in the end, was the one thing neither the universe nor he himself had anticipated. He gave the gauntlet back its silence. He set down the most powerful object ever assembled in a garden on a moon of Saturn, and he let the universe be what it was without his correction. He let it choose its own states. He let it hold its own choosing. He held his hand open, empty, in the morning light, and the universe, which had not known how to ask for this, and had not known that a being of his nature could provide it, received what it had always most needed from him, not his will, his restraint. The garden is still there, in the telling of this version. The afternoon light still moves through the crystal arrays and falls on the terrace at angles the old architects designed. The water features still run, and the scent of the plant still moves through the air in the quality that Titan's restored atmosphere gives it, and the gauntlet still rests on the stone with its 6 stones holding their quiet light, and the city below is filling, day by day, with the sounds of a civilization that was built to make its people more thoughtful, simply by existing. Let your own breathing slow now, as this story settles. Let the garden be what it is, somewhere out in the dark and the distance, on a moon of Saturn that no longer needs its story to end in ash. Let the afternoon light have its quality. Let the fountains run. There is nothing left to understand. There is only the light and the garden and the long, peaceful afternoon of a world that was restored by a being who finally, after everything, understood what restoration actually means. Let yourself go soft at the edges now. Let the story release you gently, the way a well-made story does, not pushing you toward the next thing but allowing you to rest in the completion of this one. The stones hold their light. The garden holds its quiet. The light is the same light it always was. Rest now. Let it be still. If you like this video, let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious about that. And if you have a suggested topic, feel free to leave it in the comments.